You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme: bear markets around the world as markets adjust to Trump's tariffs. Also ahead, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić attempts to install another prime minister as protests continue. Later in the show,
I will forego the Democratic primary for mayor and appeal directly to all New Yorkers as an independent candidate in the general election.
New York City's Mayor Eric Adams vows to plow on despite everything. Plus, we'll check in with our team anticipating Salone del Mobile in Milan, and we'll meet singer-songwriter Shura. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. European markets have this morning followed the cue of their Asian counterparts by undertaking swift and vertiginous descents, and there is presently nobody not expecting further losses later today in the United States, where the Dow Jones is already down nearly 8% in the last week or so. US President Donald Trump, orchestrator of this havoc, has stated that, quote, "Sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something, though it is as yet unclear to most analysts what ailment he had diagnosed or what result he expects the cure to have." Well, I'm joined with more on this by Edward Fishman, who has served in various roles at the US State Department and the Department of the Treasury, and is the author of the new book Choke Points: How the Global Economy Became a Weapon of War. And Edward, first of all, is the weaponizing of an economy actually what we're looking at here, so far as it is possible to tell?
I do believe that that is what we're looking at. If you look at the underlying rationale in actually the executive order that Trump has issued to impose these tariffs, it is about national security. He doesn't have the legal authority to impose these tariffs without declaring a national emergency. Mind you, the U.S. president has never used this national emergency authority to impose tariffs in the 50 years that this law has been on the books. What Trump is claiming is that the U.S. trade deficit is a vital national security threat to the American people because it is leading to a hollowing out of our manufacturing base. So there is this vision of national security at stake. But what we don't know yet is whether he's going to use this to try to cut deals around the world, which could really put us back to where we started and get us to a point where we aren't really leading to an onshoring of manufacturing in the next 10 years.
I mean, as somebody who deals with this stuff for a living, have you been able to perceive any rationale whatsoever in what we have learnt of his tariff regime in the last few days? And I'm not even asking about the obvious stuff like imposing tariffs of 10% on islands populated by nothing and nobody except penguins and seals, but the regime as a whole.
No, I think is a simple answer, which is that, the one thing that is clear about Trump dating back to the 1980s is that he loves tariffs. He actually took a full page ad out in the New York Times in 1987 talking about why we need tariffs. That said, since then, he has fluctuated on why he loves tariffs. He's talked about tariffs as a way to raise revenue for the government. He's talked about tariffs as a way to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And he's talked about tariffs as this all-purpose cudgel that he can use to bully other countries to bend to his will. The challenge is a lot of those goals are at cross purposes, right? If you're using tariffs as a negotiating tool, you have to be ready to lift them as soon as the target of your negotiating is willing to bend to your will. But if you're going to just lift the tariffs in a year or two, you're never going to give Americans the incentive to actually make the investments that would bring manufacturing back to the United States. So many of these goals run at cross purposes, and I don't think Trump has a clear hierarchy in his own mind.
Is it possible that the rest of the world starts looking at the United States, much as Europe has, particularly in defensive matters in the last few months, and starts to think, maybe we can't regard Trump as a glitch. Maybe this isn't an aberration. Maybe this is what the United States now is. And we have heard in the last day or so from Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, who was here running the Bank of England at a moment of great economic self-harm in the UK. And he is talking about the world sort of having to figure out how to reinvent an economic order around or without the United States. Is that possible?
I do think that it is not possible to view Trump as a glitch at this point, right? I think that there was hope maybe after he had lost re-election in 2020 that he would be this sort of blip on the radar. But it's very clear that he is a core part of the American story today. Whether it's possible for foreign countries to sort of rebuild the trading order without the United States, I think it's a noble goal, but I think it's going to be very challenging for one big reason, which is that the United States is by far the biggest deficit country in the world, right? So countries like China or Germany that routinely run very large trade surpluses, for their economies to make sense, they need a country to absorb those surpluses. Right now, it is the U.S. who is absorbing the surplus of everybody else. So if the U.S. is cutting itself off from the rest of the world, for the rest of the world to come together, some other country is going to have to raise their hand and say, okay, we're going to absorb this surplus from China and Germany and all these other places. And I don't think that you're going to have many takers. So while I understand what Mark Carney is saying, and I think in many ways it would be better off for the world if the rest of the world could figure out a way to retain, global free trade without the United States, I'm skeptical that it's possible just from a macroeconomic perspective.
Just as a final point then, and with all, acknowledgement that no one has the least idea what is going to occur in coming weeks, so we won't hold you to any predictions, but surely there has to come a point at which domestic political uproar becomes unignorable even for Donald Trump and his coterie, because there will be in the United States right now millions of people who were anticipating retiring in the next year or two and are now absorbing that they're not going to be able to do that because, as you know, what is lost in a day in markets can take years to get back. There will be people who rely on tourism for their trade who are looking at bookings of people taking holidays to the United States, which have declined precipitately in recent weeks. Surely at some point that has to register.
I think it will because, some people have said, well, what Trump is doing is finally he's favoring the American worker over the capital allocators, right? Or he's favoring Main Street over Wall Street. But I think that misses the point because at the current trajectory, there are a lot of Americans who are going to start losing their jobs. And then, as you say, retirees are going to start seeing their retirement savings dwindling to the point where they no longer can retire. That is going to cause a popular backlash. Even in recent days, we've started to see the biggest protests in the United States since the beginning of the second Trump administration. Unless Trump reverses course, you're not just going to see an elite revolt, which is already starting, where some of these big Wall Street titans who endorse Trump, like Bill Ackman, have already come out and said these tariffs, if they stay in place, are going to cause economic nuclear winter. But I do think you're going to see the average American really start getting quite angry, including many people who voted for Trump in the 2024 election.
Edward Fishman, thank you for joining us. That was Edward Fishman, former US State Department and Department of the Treasury official and author of the new book Choke Points, How the Global Economy Became a Weapon of War. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Tom Webb with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Israeli forces have bombed tents outside two major hospitals in Gaza overnight, killing a local reporter and injuring several other journalists. 15 other people were killed in separate airstrikes by Israel across the territory. Hamas fired 10 rockets at southern Israel on Sunday night, targeting cities such as Ashkelon and Ashdod. The Dominican Republic has announced a series of measures to bolster border security and tighten migration control around neighboring Haiti. The increased measures along its 300-kilometer border come as the Dominican Republic eyes the deepening crisis in Haiti. 7-Eleven is launching its first fashion products under a private label. The T-shirts are also the first product line developed by its in-house fashion and beauty task force 7 Collect, which was launched in October last year. In South Korea, 2 styles of 7 Select Sempina T-shirts will be available from Wednesday for $7.50. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Tom. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić has promised that the country will have a new government by April 18th. It is the latest attempt by Vučić to try to restore trust in, or even tolerance of, his rule after months of colossal protests occasioned by the collapse last November of a poorly maintained train station roof in Novi Sad, which killed 16 people and has since come to represent, for many Serbs, a sort of metaphor for everything. I'm joined by Monocle's Balkans correspondent, Guy Delaunay. Guy, first of all, the question that President Vučić will be asking himself, is this going to work?
Well, yes, it's a very good question because we haven't seen any sign of the students stopping their protests. We had the mega protest in the middle of last month. We haven't had anything like as large as that since, but we've had protests every day. We've currently got a group of just under 100 students cycling from Novi Sad to Strasbourg with the aim of giving a bit of a boot up the backside of the European institutions, asking them to take another look at what's going on in Serbia. And meanwhile, Mr. Vučić's answer to all of this has been to name somebody that I have to say I had never heard of, and plenty of other people in Serbia are scratching their heads about this as well, to be the new Prime Minister of Serbia.
Well, then, a question, Guy, that many Serbs are clearly asking themselves. Who is the new Prime Minister?
I can tell you his name. It's Đuro Matsut. So there you go. He's Đuro Matsut is his name. And, of course, we do know a little bit about him. And by which, I mean, I've read up frantically this morning, Andrew, on exactly who this fellow is, because the first inkling that we got of Đuro Matsut becoming the next Prime Minister of Serbia was when President Aleksandar Vučić announced that Đuro Matsut would be the next Prime Minister of Serbia. And I have to say, it's not all confirmed yet. He needs to form a government. That needs to be approved by Parliament. But bearing in mind that Mr. Vučić's Progressive Party dominates the National Assembly in Serbia, that's pretty much a formality. So what's happened in essence is that Mr. Vučić has done one of the things that people thought he might do, which was to appoint somebody from outside politics to be the Prime Minister designate, if you like, somebody who wasn't seen as a party political figure. And Đuro Matsut is an endocrinologist. Pro-regime media have described him as an internationally renowned endocrinologist. And he's the member of various international societies, has studied in places as far afield as Geneva and Oxford. But he has been a supporter of Mr. Vučić in the past. He last month appeared at a counter-protest outside the presidency in Belgrade, where there were supposed students who wanted to return to their classes, and he spoke there in support of them. Maybe this is some sort of an attempt by Mr. Vučić to say, look, we have a professor at the head of government. He's the kind of man who can deal with these student protests we've been having for the past few months. He'll get them all in order and back into their classes. That's a big question, and it's a big question whether he'll succeed or not. I did like one line though from the election monitor Sarta in their newsletter this morning. The headline was "Doctor Who."
That's a bit of a tap-in, but obviously somebody had to do it. Guy,
indeed, they did, and they did it.
On the subject of the protests, though, to be clear, though they have been student-led and student-directed, and that may, of course, be giving President Vučić a few nightmares because he was 25 years ago part of an administration, i.e. that of President Slobodan Milosevic, which was chased out of office by student-led demonstrators. But it's not just them. They do actually appear, according to opinion polling, to have a decent chunk of Serbian opinion behind them.
Yes, not just the opinion polls. I mean, I was in Belgrade last month during this mega protest, and it was clear that the numbers were enormous. And there's one outfit called the Archive on Public Demonstrations that a reasonably independent monitor of the size of protests in Serbia. By reasonably independent, I mean they're clearly no fans of the government, but they don't go for fantasy figures like some of the opposition figures either. And they put a figure on the number at the protest of between 275 and 325,000 people on the streets of Belgrade. Now, bear in mind, Serbia's got a population of about 6.5 million people. That's a very big protest for a country like Serbia. And they did say the numbers could have been even higher. So been the worrying factor all along for Mr. Vučić, that this isn't just the usual suspects who are supporting this protest movement, which is basically rooted in anti-corruption, the feeling that the regime that was supposed to be making Serbia better through its infrastructure projects has essentially killed Serbian citizens through its infrastructure projects. And the suspicion is that something's gone awry in that, something nefarious, that there's been some sort of corners cut or kickbacks taken or given. And this is why 16 people ended up dead at Novi Sad railway station. So that's the sort of thing which really strikes a nerve for people in Serbia. It's one thing saying, OK, I can go along with this government because the progressives and Mr. Vučić are clearly well organized. They've got a handle on it. They've got autocratic tendencies and a bit of the old state and media capture, but they get things done. When things start falling apart and killing people, that's clearly where a lot of Serbians draw the line.
Just finally and briefly, if you could, Guy, you were mentioning correctly that the Progressive Party does dominate Serbian politics, but within that context, are there any perceptible rivals starting to think that Vučić may be done for and now is a moment to start making manoeuvres?
I've not seen this, to be honest with you. And the Progressive Party is very much Mr. Vučić's baby. He formed the party alongside Tomislav Nikolic in 2008. Mr. Nikolic went on to be president, but Mr. Vučić really took over the party and controls it utterly. I mean, theoretically, the outgoing Prime Minister Miloš Vučević is the president of the party, but nobody is really looking beyond Mr. Vučić in terms of the control of the Progressive Party at the moment. But you never know. Serbian politics, we do get a lot of splits. The Progressive Party itself came from a split from the radical parties. So watch this space, I think, Andrew.
Guy Delaunay, thanks as always for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and it is Salone del Mobile Eve. The 63rd iteration of the furniture and design event begins tomorrow in Milan, and I am joined from there by Konfekt editor Sophie Grove. Sophie, first of all, the question which is preoccupying much of the world and will be preoccupying, I'm sure, the furniture business, which relies very heavily on international trade, the impact of tariffs, if they hold up on the businesses exhibiting at Salone del Mobile. Is there much concern in the air?
Well, hello from Via Solferino in the very sunny corner of Milan. I mean, I've been here for a few days and been at various soirees and parties speaking to CEOs and designers. I mean, it is definitely a conversation that's coming up, you know, whispered in corners. There's a sense of optimism, and there always is at Salone, because it's about innovation and new ideas. But there is an anxiety. I mean, one CEO I was talking to last night was saying, look, this is probably not going to affect me personally as a luxury business all that much, but it's more the confidence in the markets more generally. And, you know, the stocks going down is making people feel anxious overall. But I think as a luxury sector, there's a confidence that, you know, this customer will hopefully put faith in the product, whatever the tariff might be. And I've certainly seen huge delegations of Americans, buyers and press at various different brands. I was just at Poltronafrau, which is a very esteemed furniture leather company, and you know it's packed out with buyers, people on terraces making you know quite big decisions about what they're buying for their stores over the next couple of seasons, certainly. So it's very interesting to see. But I think the answer is a cautious yes.
Regular listeners will be aware that Monocle are pretty regular attendees at Salone del Mobile. So what are we actually up to at this one?
So we have a huge delegation ourselves, actually. I'm here with Nick Moniz and Grace Charlton, Tyler Brûlé. We're all sort of meeting different brands, going to different events. And we're hosting something tonight ourselves with a brand called Cupra. So I think it's a real sense of getting out in the city, finding inspiration, but also meeting up with friends of Monocle and Konfekt to check in with what they're doing and sort of discover, these incredible brands that have supported us as well.
On the subject of soirees, which you referred to earlier, and Salone del Mobile does strike me as very much a soirees rather than parties event. You attended one which I understand was heavily bamboo themed.
It was. So the interesting thing about Salone is increasingly there's a fashion presence. And Gucci had a beautiful party last night in some cloisters, which was bamboo themed, because Gucci's always had this synergy with bamboo handles in their handbags. So they commissioned 6 artists and designers to experiment with bamboo. And there were these installations, an incredible party, lots of drinks. I don't know how much bamboo really was the feature after a while, because it's partly the milieu and partly the outfits, but it was a great evening.
And just as you prepare for the opening of Salone del Mobile tomorrow, what are you personally most looking forward to?
Well, I think it's really about discovering parts of Milan. Some of these venues are so incredible. Flexform is this wonderful brand, and they hosted which I've already been. I mean, I should say that Salone is kind of in it's already in full swing. There's a sense that, openings aside, everyone's here from Sunday. And I went to these most amazing sort of cloisters built in 1936 by Giovanni Muzio, who is a rationalist architect, just never opened before. And it was hosting this incredible furniture, but also you get to see inside these amazing buildings. So I think part of the real sort of sense of wonder about this event is going inside some of the most beautiful structures. Villa Necci, there's a beautiful party coming up there later in the week. And I think, it's that synergy between the modernist, the kind of mid-century, and then the new contemporary designers that really makes it very special.
Sophie Grove, editor of Konfekt, thank you for joining us. And there will be much more from Monocle's team at Salone del Mobile across all our shows this week, also in our free daily email newsletters. For now, you are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. To understate matters audaciously, it has been a dramatic political week in the United States. But while all eyes were on Washington, D.C. and the President's Liberation Day tariffs, another kind of liberation has been taking place in New York City. On Wednesday, New York's Mayor Eric Adams was relieved of corruption charges by a federal judge. The mayor then chose to free himself from the shackles of the Democratic Party by announcing his intention to stand for re-election as an independent. From New York, here is Monocle's Charlie Bell on the political drama starring His Honor.
It all began so well.
The team told me to come through the back.
In the midst of the pandemic, New York elected its second ever black mayor, the Democrat Eric Adams.
And they said, this is the way we want you to move. And I said to them, I'm the mayor.
Fast forward to last Wednesday night and to the steps of Gracie Mansion, the mayor's residence, where Mayor Adams greets the news that corruption charges against him have been dropped by a federal judge.
I also want to apologize to New Yorkers for having to go through this with me, a baseless case that should have never been brought in the first place.
Within hours, he announced his intention to seek re-election, not as a Democrat, but as an independent.
I'm not a quitter. I'm a New Yorker. And that is why today I am announcing that I will forego the Democratic primary for mayor and appeal directly to all New Yorkers as an independent candidate in the general election.
The 4-year story of the Adams administration is a tale of a shapeshifter whose optimistic start evolved into a rancorous relationship with the federal government, sunk into a morass of corruption allegations, before a salvation of sorts in the unlikely form of President Trump. Once, albeit briefly, hailed as the future of the Democratic Party, Eric Adams cut a dash in fine suits and had a taste for the high life and the nightlife.
This is a city that never sleeps, so the mayor should not be taking a nap.
The truth, though, is that Mayor Adams was always viewed with suspicion from the Democratic base. His time as a registered Republican in the 90s didn't help, and his honeymoon didn't last long. As the influx of migrants and asylum seekers engulfed New York during the Biden years, stretching city resources and leading to harsh budget cuts, his response, New York had been betrayed by the federal government.
We all are angry. I tell people all the time when they stop me on the subway system, don't yell at me, yell at DC. We went to the federal government and said, this is your opportunity to give us what a national problem is. And they set you on your own, Eric.
Democrats in Washington quickly tired of his grandstanding, and relations ruptured. And in the heat of this row, a swirl of allegations of corruption emerged.
Today we are announcing campaign finance, bribery, and conspiracy charges against Eric Adams. As the indictment alleges, Mayor Adams engaged in a long-running conspiracy in which he solicited and knowingly accepted illegal campaign contributions from foreign donors and corporations.
Centering on illegal favors for the Turkish government, rooted in the expediting of approval of a new consulate in New York in exchange for upgrades and luxury travel, Adams said he was the victim of trumped-up charges. Conviction seemed a no-brainer. That was until the resurrection of Donald J. Trump. Here's candidate Trump addressing a gathering of New York's great and good during his re-election campaign.
As I look around the dais, I see all of the usual suspects. For instance, Mayor Adams. I'd like to poke some fun at Eric, but I'm going to be nice. I just want to be nice because I know what it's like to be persecuted by the DOJ for speaking out against open borders. I was persecuted, and so are you, Eric.
After Trump's victory in November, Mayor Adams wasted little time in heading to Mar-a-Lago to break bread with him and cement their relationship.
It would be irresponsible for me not to go down and speak with the president. Mm-hmm. And hats off to him. He met with me days before his inauguration. You know, that says a lot about his love for the city, and that says a lot of how much respect he had for this administration.
But everyone's suspicion was that in the Florida sunshine, a deal with the Don had been struck. Agree to support the new administration's immigration policies, and those pesky corruption charges would magically disappear. And so, it seems, it came to pass. For within weeks of the inauguration, Emile Beauvais, one-time lawyer for Trump, now a senior Justice Department official, began pressuring prosecutors to kill the case. This was met with a flurry of resignations as a series of senior lawyers bridled at such blatant political pressure. Mayor Adams always denied the quid pro quo at Mar-a-Lago, but on the Fox News sofa, alongside Tom Homan, President Trump's border czar, the truth was laid embarrassingly bare.
If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, and we won't be sitting on the couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, where the hell is it?
Key deputy mayors resigning in disgust, and the race was on for his Democratic rivals. Andrew Cuomo, the state's former governor and scion of a New York political dynasty, himself forced to resign in a sexual harassment scandal, emerged as the leading contender.
It won't be easy, but I know we can turn the city around. And I believe I can help. And that is why I announced my candidacy today for mayor of New York City.
So I'm standing in City Hall, the seat of city government from where Mayor Adams governs. I'm looking at a big poster saying, text with Eric on 917-909-2288. An example of his outreach to the public. A public who seem to have had enough of him. So I'm here with Chris Banks, and you are a councilman.
Yes, for the 42nd Council District.
How do you feel about the mayor's announcement yesterday that he's going to run as an independent?
Very interesting. I know the mayor was a Republican back in the days, and I know he changed his registration over to actually run in the Democratic primary to become a Democrat. So it's a very interesting move. He's now turning his back on a host of Democrats who had supported him at one time. It sounds obviously it may be strategic, but it's definitely an interesting move by an interested mayor.
What did you think about the charges which emerged?
It seems like those charges were dismissed. Nevertheless, I think it's on record that this was a quid pro quo. It tainted the mayor. It was a confirmation of some of the things that were being put out there about the corruption that existed in the administration. I think this has just been an unhinged, ongoing story with this administration. I guess the nightmare has come to an end. It would be better off if the mayor just stepped down and moved on, but obviously his plan is to continue this train wreck.
And just from the point of view of your constituents, how did all of this play out with them? What were you hearing when you were going around your district?
They were frustrated, disappointed with what was going on with the mayor. It added on to the traumas that they're facing with the redundancies in the economy, the circus that's going on in D.C. My constituents want some type of rest, some type of ease, but it doesn't seem like we're going to get that.
That was Charlie Bell reporting from New York City. This is The Briefing. This is The Briefing. Finally on today's show, some music. After a long hiatus, the British singer-songwriter Shura is back with a new album, once again full of ethereal vocal and synths, but this time the album also packs an emotional punch. It's called I Got Too Sad for My Friends. She paid us a visit to speak to Monocle Radio's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, and explained why it took her so long to release a follow-up to her 2019 album, Forever Her.
Well, I think, firstly, I would say that in general, I like to take my time. I think even when the first record, Touch, came out in 2014, and it wasn't until 2016 that I had an album, and we even made a website called Has Shura Finished Her Album Yet.com. So it became a bit of a thing. But with this record specifically, lots of reasons. I think I was halfway through touring the second record when that all had to sort of overnight come to a halt. And I think I'm very I work in phases. So I'm writing, I'm recording, I'm touring, and I rarely sort of mix those phases. I hear all the time about artists who write on tour, and I'm so jealous. I'm like, that would be so useful.
Doing two things at the same time.
Yeah, two things at the same time. Can you imagine? So I think I wasn't really ready to kind of re-enter writing when I probably needed to. And kind of also life was, for all of us, I think I wasn't really experiencing anything, and I certainly wasn't experiencing, it was unique to all of us, but it wasn't unique in that I would just be writing about being stuck playing video games in my apartment, and that's what everyone else is doing, and I don't know how much we will want to visit an entire album about that. So yeah, it was kind of a mix of things.
During this period, were you mainly in New York, right?
Mainly, and then I moved back. Well, I didn't really move back. I came back to London to do some bits, and then realised I couldn't return. So my partner had to move when we finally decided to come back and be in London. She had to move and pack all of our belongings, not just hers. It was kind of mad endeavour.
Well, let's talk about the new album. Even the name of the album, I Got Too Sad for My Friends. It shows that this album has quite an emotional heft to it as well. And of course, I've listened to the whole album. I think some songs are very Shura for those who know your music, but some others are quite different. I do think this album there's a certain level of depth and sadness as well, if we can say that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's also for those fans that are expecting a Nothing's Real too, and they do exist, and they existed before I put out Forever. It's not that record. I think there's treats in there for people who love that era of mine. So it's not a completely I don't care about you. There's sort of nuggets of fun. But I think the theme for my life and this record was just I don't want to do anything the same way, because I don't really see the point, and I don't really see how I could grow. And even if at the end of it I sort of ended up with something maybe I didn't like, I thought it was important to try approaching it in a different way. And luckily I love it, and I think that's always the only thing that you can sort of hope for when you embark upon a creative process, is that sort of by the end of it you like the thing you've made. And it's complicated, there are periods where you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? The valley of despair definitely happens when you're creating. But no, I'm really proud of this record.
But even the production, I mean, one thing that is still there, I mean, you know, talking about the fans is the crystal clear vocals. I mean, that's the beauty that's still in there. The lyrics might be a little bit more, you know, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's a really internalized, I say that, but then Nothing's Real was all kind of very internal and anxious, but it felt kind of like a teenage approach to sort of those topics. And I think, you know, one thing that I will always do is kind of, I just love production, and I love that process and adding all these details and layers. And I think for those people who enjoy that aspect of my music, the detail and the kind of sonic landscape and fabric of it, will find that this is really rich, even if the textures are different.
Exactly, because sure, there's a lot of the electropop perhaps that you're known for, but you've added a lot of elements of kind of a little bit of folk, a little bit of Americana as well. So tell us, was that that kind of music that you always listened to it, or was it a complete departure for you?
I think a lot of Americana and kind of chamber pop, it's part of the fabric of, you know, we're very familiar with it because it's played so a lot. And I think artists like Paul Simon, for instance, I was listening to a lot of those kind of classic records when I was writing this, and I think they were just very comforting to me. And I feel like I can't, you know, speak about that without mentioning also Cassandra Jenkins, who features on Richardson, but her record, An Overview on Phenomenal Nature, was a record that kind of really got hold of me in a way that a record hadn't for a really long time, and sort of listening to her music and the fact that it felt comforting and like something I could crawl up into, I think was something I really needed, and also felt like I needed to explore in my own music.
And in Richardson, I think that song is precisely about your time in New York, right?
Yeah.
That was the British singer-songwriter Shura speaking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Her new album, I Got Too Sad for My Friends, will be released on the 30th of May. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Francesca Jokes, and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time, midday London. I'm Andrew Muller. Thank you for listening.